Meeting is streaming live on Facebook. Greetings to all of our faithful, weary listener watchers. I want to take full responsibility for all of the delays. I think all of them are my fault. Is that right? The last two?
Yeah, either way, we'll blame it on you because you're the
kind of
most hardcore patriarchalist. So everything
as,
is your fault.
As a member of the patriarchy, I take full responsibility.
Thank you. What a leader.
So we finally got together. I've bailed twice and caused us to have to reschedule because of my travels and other things. And now we finally had everybody all lined out. Everybody except for one person who was supposed to be here until the 11th hour. So we're hoping he'll join us, but if not, we didn't want to keep anybody in suspense any longer. Oh, Anthony entered the waiting room.
Let's let him in. He might have to go. He might have to go at some point because he has a friend in town, but we're going to let him lay out his case first in case he needs to bounce. Anthony, are you there?
Not yet. So until Anthony shows up, obviously we wanted to talk about the long-standing controversy with free sisters in the Dank Kingdom world and their long-standing contention with the patriarchalists, of which I think Dave and I are both team patriarchy to varying degrees, and Anthony maybe, and Titus is definitely a free bro ish.
Yeah, although I'm not gonna really be representing their views. I feel like there's a spectrum. So patriarchalism is on the far right, and then you have you have full-fledged egalitarians, and then you have like the people who really want to be egalitarians and basically are. But if you really pin them down, you'll finally squeak it out of them that women cannot be lead pastors.
Right.
And then you have me, which is right balance between all the chaos holding the biblical truth.
So, but you keep going further on the spectrum toward egalitarian, and I mean, you've got that there's absolutely no.
So, most of my memes are attacking the patriarchy just because that's more fun. but
well, it hurts less. We can take it more.
You'll hear a little bit about what I actually believe, hopefully tonight.
I'm actually very eager to hear what other people's beliefs are. I'm eager to hear, especially how where we see things the same and where we would split some hairs.
Sure. Is Anthony still not here?
No,
Can you guys hear me yet?
We can hear you, but we can't see you.
All right, I'll be there in a second.
Anthony,
we're like Paul on the road. Paul's friends on the road to Damascus. We hear the voice, but we see no man.
Now we got him.
That?
There he is. All right.
Okay.
So we know you might have to boogie, Anthony. So we wanted to give you the opening monologue to share kind of what your thoughts and feelings are. And we should, we're going to have to define terms along the line at some point. But basically, we're talking about the interrelationship between the sexes. Like why are men and what? How do we navigate God's purpose in the sexes? Like, what does it mean for us to be created as God and all those things? So that's I think at the heart of what all of us want to be reaching for. And so we want you give you your shot first, Anthony, to take a stab at defining some of those things.
Well, that's a big order, and I had a lot going on today. I feel like I'm not as well prepared as I'd like to be for this, but I think that for in my mind, the foundational thing that we find in the scripture is that sort of underlies everything else about humans and male and female, is that we are humanity is male and female. So there's not like a prototype human and then a knockoff human, or I think it's really important that God's vision for humanity was male and female, and that together those the two manifest the image of God, and they have to both be there to manifest the image of God the way he intended humanity to do. And the other thing is that humans were created as royal.
Did we lose him?
I see him frozen. When's he gonna get better internet?
He said they're running fiber out to the Ozarks.
Is that where he lives?
Yeah. I don't know if he actually does, but that's what I think of wherever he lives. It's just one step closer than the moon.
Yeah, well, he was talking about male and female being created in God's image and trying to lay a foundation, which I think is really important, because that was a concept that would have been fairly revolutionary in the Near East. Well, first of all, it was revolutionary that non-kings were created in God's image, but the idea that you know, people who were not kings were God's image, but also male and female, I think is also pretty amazing.
I'm always a little skeptical when I hear things like that. Like, I don't know what the primary source information for that claim is, because it seems like a lot of folk religions derive their substance from being created like their gods.
Well, I'm trying to remember the source, but essentially only kings were considered the image of God in that time. I don't have sources offhand, but I think this is fairly well established. And I would think that calling a female the image of God would be another step. But
I think we'd have to define who we're talking about in regards to that.
Mm.
I don't know. That's a universal claim.
So I've got a flaky Wi-Fi card here that just took that moment to drop out on us. But
do you live in the Ozarks, Anthony?
I do.
Booyah.
I do. And it's a great place to live. And they're currently, like, our phone company is digging around, putting in lots of orange conduit. They're going to run fiber to all of our houses. So all those problems should be in the past soon. But anyway, yeah. So I think, did I drop out just when I was saying that humans are royalty?
Yes.
So yes, I think there's, I'm not going to cite any sources here either, but you can look it up later. Maybe we can dig some things up and drop them in the show notes. But there's a very strong pagan understanding that the kings are made in the image of God. The kings represent the gods. They are the image of God. I think the same language is actually used about kings, but then people are on all different levels. There are commoners, there are untouchables, depending on your society, and people are not valued the same. So because of that, the Jewish claim is actually pretty fundamentally like radical, revolutionary in Genesis, that humans, male and female, together are made in the image of God. And interestingly, this comes up again in the imagery of the priests' garments that God very, prescribes in detail in, in the preparation for the tabernacle and so on. Those garments are modeled after the way that the Babylonians, I believe it was, dressed their idols, which is again a specific, like a symbolic claim that humans are the image of God. He doesn't have other idols. You don't create something out of wood and create a body for him to manifest himself in the way the pagans did. You are the body that God has created to manifest himself in. He made that for him. And so that's who we are fundamentally, is we are representatives of God. He put us here on the earth to rule it. That's all, fairly basic stuff, I think. But I would see male and female as not being primarily one derived from the other. Although that's the way the story's told, there's some element of that there. But like God created man to be with woman, and there's it's almost as if the story is highlighting the fact that you start out with man alone, and you demonstrate that it wasn't good that way, which gives a repudiation to any theology in the future that would see men as self-sufficient to manifest God, with women just being passive recipients of that. So I believe that within that, man and woman being jointly the image of God, that there's also roles and created differences between us that line up with a pattern. I wouldn't say a prescription, but a pattern in creation that we would generally expect to see healthy men and women fall into. It's really, really important, I think. I can expound on that later if we have a chance, but that's all I'm going to say right now. I'm not going to go into detail about that pattern, but I think it's really important to understand that when there's a pattern in creation, it doesn't mean that outliers don't exist, and it doesn't mean that outliers are morally wrong. And this is where I think a lot of, chaotic, a lot of strife comes into the discussion about these things, is because your more fundamentalist types will take a pattern they think they see, and they'll make that a prescription for every human being, and they'll turn you into a second-class Christian if you don't manifest that pattern exactly as they expect to see it. We do not see that happening in the Old Testament with male and female roles. We see outliers in the Old Testament. We see outliers, I would say, in the New Testament as well. But there are some notable examples, like the case of Deborah and Barak, where Deborah is judging Israel, and Barak's unwillingness to step up is highlighted in that story, and the actions of Deborah and Jael in winning the battle are celebrated. These women are not in any way, there's nothing in the story to reflect on them as having failed, and it's quite the contrary. They've succeeded in helping the Lord's armies win a battle, but God clearly strengthened them for the task. But Barak is shamed by that series of events because he was supposed to be leading in that battle. He was called to lead. He didn't step up, and so God called the women. And so those women are celebrated for stepping into a void that was not part of their normal pattern of their culture, and I would argue have created male and female roles. And that's a really important distinction. There are outliers, and the outliers are not evil, but there is also a created pattern. And when we want to describe, say, what a certain variety of tree looks like, we don't take one that happens to be growing on a hillside and has caught a strong wind from one direction, and its branches are configured differently than most trees of that variety, and say, okay, this is the one we're going to put into the guidebook. But that doesn't mean we look at it and say, well, that's not a legitimate ponderosa pine. That's just that's something else, or that thing shouldn't be growing like that. It's adapted to its environment. It's a good thing. It's made good, but it isn't a representative of the creation pattern. And so I think when we are prepared to celebrate the goodness of every kind of male and female who are living in God's, into God's will for them as well as they can, and whose way of living that out may I think there are boundaries within scripture, but it's a broad range of ways that we can live out what it means to be male and female. And some of those ways are stereotypically, what we think of as masculine and feminine, and some of them are not. And I believe that within the boundaries of God's moral code, those are all good. And that means that heavy-handed prescriptions that make, for women staying within certain boundaries of ways of behaving or roles in the home or whatever, that tend to make someone who doesn't fit that stereotype less than, I think they're ungodly. I don't think they celebrate the variation that God allowed to exist in creation, the variation that arises from our different environments and backgrounds, and from the dysfunctional situations that we often find ourselves in. I mean, the obvious example is a woman who's in a family where the husband is an unbeliever and he doesn't have any interest in spiritual leadership of the family. I think that's his job. It would be his job if he was a believer. And we're talking, we have to define leadership and all that. But if he's not stepping up to the plate, that's her job. And it's her job in any case to share that leadership with him, to be a joint heir with Christ and a joint, a queen of the family alongside the father and husband. So yeah, that's pretty off the cuff, but that's kind of my framework for looking at these things. And I'll let you guys jump off from there and push back or whatever.
We could talk about several questions I'd want some clarification and definition, but I'd love to jump in and just hear from Blanky. How do you view these issues? It's good just to hear everybody kind of give an introduction, just to hear where people are coming from and what the central thoughts that they approach the issue with are. So where are you coming from, Blank?
Yeah. I guess I'd start out by saying that probably 85, probably as much as 95% of what he said, I would agree with. I think, Anthony, especially your ideas about outliers are super powerful and something that in these conversations needs to be addressed. And I don't know if I'd go so far as to say front and center, but definitely a big part of the conversation, because that's where so much of the so much of the painful stuff comes from, is the fact that we have outliers who've been crushed and squashed down because they don't meet the stereotypical roles that sometimes are even just culturally imposed. But with that said, like, where I want to come from in my approach here is simply going to be, this is my view of the pattern. I'm aware there are outliers and so on, but I think we would all four agree that using outliers to establish a pattern is a really bad way to go about it. And I feel like that does happen a lot of times in these conversations, is you make some type of statement that is the normative statement, and immediately people point to the outliers to prove that your statement is problematic. And that's where I have an issue. So my basic view, and I've done some lives on this. Some of you may have already watched them. So if you have, you've heard some of these thoughts before. But I'm gonna start out by saying, unlike Matthew, I'm not stuck on the term patriarchy. The main reason why I use it is because it's a word everybody knows what it means, or at least thinks they do. And if I were to call myself something else besides patriarchal, and I get questioned on what I actually believe, then I'm going to get told, well, I'm actually teaching patriarchal ideas. And so now not only am I a patriarchalist, I'm also a lying patriarchalist. So I'd rather just say this is what it is. I realize there's problematic patriarchy out there, but there's problematic just about everything out there. And so the fact that something is used to abuse people or beat people down, or that it makes room for abuse, doesn't discount whether or not that thing is true. I tend to focus my views in this discussion on the roles of men and women, specifically within the marriage relationship. I think we have a lot more basis in scripture for formulating and understanding what that relationship is supposed to look like than we do for overall gender relations outside specifically that marriage connection, which I think is pretty closely prescribed in scripture. I think there's an order that's given there in scripture in a number of different places. The most basic passage being Ephesians 5, but then there's others, 1 Corinthians and so forth. I want to start out with the focus that the Bible says in Genesis 2, for this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, shall be joined to his wife, and they two should be called one flesh. And that is the core of understanding what biblical headship, my preferred term, biblical headship, is about. Is this concept that you have two things that are different. You have male and female that are different, that come together and form a new thing. I like the Latin word tertium quid. It means a thing that is a new class of thing. It's a third thing. And that's what's happening within marriage, is there's a subsuming of the individual persons into a new thing. They become a new organism. And that's really important, because when you hear your take Doug Phelps's, for instance, and these type of people that are teaching what I would view as really toxic, ugly versions of patriarchy, it's man-centric. And so basically it's assumed that the wife and her personhood and her identity is subsumed into him. And biblically, that's not what's happening. Biblically, what's happening is both of them are subsumed into something larger than themselves, which is the marriage. And for the purpose of this discussion, I'm going to use three terms. I'm going to use body, head, and person. And when I use person, I'm referring to the whole person that is the new oneness that's created in marriage. Everything in marriage is supposed to be for the good of the whole marriage person, not for the good of the head, not for the good of the body, but for the good of that whole person. And when you realize that, as a husband and wife come together, they both have a role within that. The head and the body work together to do everything. If you think about that as a human, you have a head and you have a body, and those two things are working together. If I walk over to the couch and sit down, I don't, you don't say, well, which one did that? Did your head do that or your body do that? Well, I did it. My whole self did it. It was something that, yeah, I guess we all thought it was a good plan. So we went ahead and did that. And everything within the marriage relationship that I see as taught in scripture falls into that understanding of the body, of a whole body. It's a full person. And so the husband is given the job to care for, to love, to nourish, to cherish, all these things. And the wife is given a job to cooperate with, submit to, work with the husband. That was Freudian slip, I guess. But so this definitely not worship the husband, but the two become one. And so if you have a body where part of the body is not acting in the best interest of the rest of the body, the head is not acting in the best interest of the body. Takes, for instance, somebody that gets in their head that they should run out into traffic. We call that an insane person. They're acting in a way that they're putting themselves in danger. If we have somebody whose brain is not responding to the needs of the body, we call that a leprous person. There's injuries that happen, and we see people in their marriages that their fingers and toes of the body are falling off, metaphorically speaking. And it's because there's not a care there, that there's a leprous relationship, that the head is not receiving from the needs of the body. This is what I need. This is what's going on. And there's an understanding in my view of biblical headship of that oneness, that there's two separate people who become one organism and work together, not for the good of him or the good of her, but for the good of them. Him and her become them. And I think that has to be central. Anything that we talk about with headship has to come with that understanding with it. And that's why I don't talk in terms of power and power over people. And people say, well, does the husband have the right to tell his wife to whatever, put herself in danger? And frankly, to me, that's like asking, well, do you have the ability to put your arm in a wood chipper? Well, yeah, I do, I guess. But why would you do that? That's insane. You're an insane person at that point if you're going around putting your arms in wood chippers. I mean, I guess you can only do that twice, really. But you can't do that. And the fact that we're even having a discussion about whether or not I have the power over my body to put my arm in a wood chipper shows like there's something wrong with this person. Something is wrong here. And so often when we have these conversations about headship, immediately that's where the talk veers. Well, what about who's got the power? Who's wielding the power? And this has happened in my marriage where we've made a decision, we've made a move, we've done this or that. And I've had people privately come to my wife and say, well, what do you think about this? She said, what do you mean when I think about this? This is something we came to together. This is something we're in together. Like, it's what we're doing. It's not his idea or my idea. This is our idea. But that's worked out in a relationship that's pictured, which is that the head, me, is as Christ, loving, nourishing, treating her like she is my own body. When she hurts, I hurt. When she needs, I need. When she's hungry, I'm hungry. All the things that she needs become my needs, and vice versa. And if you don't have that as your understanding of all the rest of what Paul has to say, of course you're going to leave room for abuse. Of course you're going to leave room for men to be wicked, vile, abusive, power-hungry people. But that's the result of ignoring the basic premise that Paul says, which is that two are one, and whoever loves his wife loves himself. So that's my view of headship. And then with that, I do believe everything it says. Husbands, love your wives. Wives, submit to your husband as the Christ to the church, as the church to Christ. As the church is subject to Christ, so let the wife be to your husband in all things. And I don't think there's any way around that. But it's all within the context of that one flesh relationship. And if you have a woman that's in this one flesh relationship where her husband is not taking care of her, I would be the first person in line to tell her, your husband does not have a right to stick his arm in a wood chipper. What he's doing is disordered and wrong and not according to the word of God. And if we can't be saying that, then yes, we've got toxic patriarchy. So there's a lot of other stuff we could go into as far as roles of men and women, but I want to make this kind of my opening statement. This is, to me, the core of what it means to believe in biblical headship. So I'm done. I'm going to go mute now. Somebody else can go.
I think that's a good distinction to make, because I was going to ask you, like, the problem is, like, I can go a long way with everything you said. I think the difference is my scope is a little more encompassing than the way you would limit those parameters. But the principle is the same. But the problem is that you got me now. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I was saying I think we'll talk about where we may split some hairs, but the problem I was going to raise is that there's so very many wood chippered arms walking around, and I think that's where a lot of the pushback comes from, is that I think that we should develop our principles around ideals as well, but we have to have some kind of recourse, and I think that analysis in the end is a right way to end that a crazy person walking around hacking on your body with a insane asylum and get you some help or stick your. So that's interesting about perspective there, Titus.
You were cutting out for a bit, but I think you just asked me to give my perspective. Okay. Well, Blanky Dave used the term toxic patriarchy at the end there, so I guess he concedes defeat. So that was exciting to hear. I actually like what both of you said a lot, Anthony and David. And I think I'm going to try to turn the podcast a little bit into some of the more controversial things, because Matthew mentioned at the beginning that, he's put his view out there enough that, we're all three going to have opening statements, but he's not too concerned about that for him. So I'll let my spiel be kind of what turns the conversation to some of the sticky issues, I guess. I wanted to start by addressing the term patriarchal. I think it's an enormously unhelpful term. I know what you guys mean when you use it. I know if you go to the etymology of the word, it means father lead, and you believe that fathers should lead. Sure. But that's not really the way my dogs are trying to get in. That's not really the way the English language works. Like, words evolve and take on new meanings. And when people hear the term patriarchal, it's almost always with a negative association. And I just don't think that's a great way to build bridges. So I'd be curious, when we open up the conversation, why you wouldn't just use the term complementarian, which also isn't really viewed with a great amount of joy, but it's better. Like, it's going to build more bridges. So just to put my views out there, okay, on what you'll probably drill me on. So I do think there is more of an emphasis in a marriage on the wife submitting than on the husband submitting. I do think that the verse that says submit to one another does refer also to husbands. And I think that could go both ways. I've heard your response to that, David, and I understand it, but I still think that, and I think it could go both ways. I still think that it does apply to husbands. So I do believe in mutual submission. However, I do see more of an emphasis on the wife submitting, certainly, than on the husband. I don't know how you can get around that. Now, I was having a conversation with Matthew's friend Drew earlier today about this, and he was having a problem with me saying, well, therefore, because the wife needs to submit more to the man, therefore the man needs to lead the marriage or lead the home. And I was like, why? That seems like an easy thing to infer. And he pointed out that what Paul prescribes is actually kind of takes you by surprise. Like, he says, wives submit, everyone's like, yeah. And then he turns to the husband and says, you love her like Christ does the church. Like, you serve her, you get on your knees and wash her feet. And so that's about as much as I think the scripture says about marriage is you guys submit to each other. There's more of an emphasis on the wife submitting, and you husbands, like, you better be loving and serving your wives. That's really, really important. So now when it comes
I'm cool with that up to this point. We're 100%, bro. Okay,
sweet. Wow. But you don't believe in mutual submission.
I think that's a dumb term. I don't think that.
I was going to get to this. I don't care what term you use for it,
right,
as long as we're doing the same thing. Now in churches, it follows the way. It's this whole thing with women not speaking or asking questions. Our Followers the Way Church in Richmond, the women are allowed to ask questions, and I wanted to drill Matthew on that at some point. But yeah, I do think that there is a gendered role, especially for teaching authoritatively in church, and that's for men only.
Why would that be?
Because the scripture says that women are not permitted to teach or hold authority over a man.
Do we have any idea why that should be?
I don't know.
Okay.
You can. So I think what you're getting at, I mean, to me, it's not intuitive. Like, I don't think that there's anything about a woman's DNA that makes her unfit to teach. In fact, there's a lot of women who I would much rather hear teach and preach than men. But I think what you're getting at is like the way Paul roots it in cosmic realities and divine realities. And that's actually why I don't think it's simply cultural. When something is rooted in something cosmic or divine as its foundation, I think that's Paul specifically trying to root it in something other than culture. And I think that's goes for the head covering as well.
Man, we're knocking them out of the park. We are just like simpatico.
Now I
all
don't
the way
know
through here.
about eternal subordination of the Son, and I think some, like, the analogy is certainly there of the Son submitting to the Father and church submitting to the Son, and then man and woman, and that analogy and that is certainly there. Now, but I would say it's just that, it's an analogy. You can't press it too far. Like, for example, Dave talked about the head and the body and gave a nice marriage sermon, which was great. But if you press that too far, like, it can be problematic. In other words, like, my arm, I can't move this arm without my head telling it to move. And my wife, Brenna, can certainly do things without me telling her to do it. Like, some of these analogies can be taken to extremes, and I think that's something to keep in mind as well. Now, when it comes to work and society, I really don't care. Like, there's a refugee resettlement program that I'm helping in Charlottesville, and women lead it, and I'm joyfully coming underneath their headship and leadership there, and I think they're doing a great job. So that's not really, I don't think is really important for us to fight that battle. So I wanted to give an example of how I think that, like I said earlier, the terms we use is not as important to me as actually what would take place in a marriage relationship. So, for example, my wife Brenna is not vaccinated, and I asked her if I could use this example, and she said yes. She's not vaccinated. Now, if I really followed what I've heard from you, Dave, to the extreme, and she doesn't need to submit to me, or sorry, I don't need to submit to her, because submit to one another is a broad statement, and then it gives the specifics of it later. If that's true, that there's no such thing as mutual submission, my only job is to love her, okay? Well, I believe that she would be more protected if she was vaccinated. So if I really love her, I will tell her against her will to get vaccinated. And her job is to submit to my loving leadership. Now, if that's the case, like, if you, and maybe I'll just ask you straight up, do you think that is within my right to tell her to get vaccinated? Because if so, I think I have a real problem with that. I think that would be really messed up for me to do that.
Well, I guess my response to that would simply be, if you're forcing your wife to do anything against her will, you're doing it wrong. Like that.
But what's submission? So your definition of submission, therefore, is not doing something against your will, right?
Right. Right. It's
Okay.
not submitting. Like, submitting means to place yourself under order, under whatever the order is. And so if you tell her, this is what I want you to do, like, and she doesn't have a choice and she's coerced into doing it, however that coercion is happening, like, that's not, in my opinion, that's not true submission. Like, that's like saying that I donated money to the mugger. No, I didn't donate money to the mugger. I gave it to him because I had to. Like, submission, it's a principle. It's this picture of coming together, where she looks to you and she says, hey, I respect your opinion. I value what you have to say, but you're cognizant of her needs. And if that's what you mean by mutual submission, well then, yeah, you're going to have a conversation until you've both come to a point as a person, a marriage person, that this is what is best for us as a unit. And that might be her not being vaccinated. That might be her getting vaccinated. Depends on what the goals of your marriage are. Depends on what your value system within your marriage are. But definitely, this is not, well, I command you to go get vaccinated and she's just got to suck it up. I don't see the, I'm not saying that I can't ever imagine a situation that was so important to the husband that he'd look at his wife and say, look, I feel like this is so important. I just got to ask you to do it. Even though you hate to do it, I just got to ask you to do it because it's that important. I'm sure that situation could maybe exist, but you're going to run into that one time in 50 years. Like, that is not the norm. And that is not the way that a marriage is supposed to operate. Like, it's supposed to be you and your body, head and body, working together as a unit, so that whatever she does, she's doing because either she realizes it's important, or else she feels like the explanations that you've given are so valuable that even though are so worth listening to, that even though that wouldn't be her choice, she's willing to do it because she trusts you. But it's
Sure.
never the result that she's doing it because she feels like she has to do it, or she's going to be damned it or something.
Yeah.
Like, if that's where you're,
Let me-
if that's what's happening, you're doing it wrong.
Let me take a crack at it, Dave. So I just spoke on this in Minneapolis, and the way I explained submission, and this will work for my premise in this discussion, is that if we start with First Corinthians, and you can start in a lot of places, you can start in Genesis, but it kind of gets summed up in the Corinthian headship passage. And this is why I think it's appropriate to look at marriage in particular as a more specific case study than gender in general. When you look at that analogy, the process that Paul puts out in the Corinthian passage is that what the Father is to the Son, man is to Christ, woman is to man. And that's very much in the sense of an order of creation. So I think that the Trinity is an important place to begin looking at why gender works the way it does. Because if you understand the Trinity, I think in a classic sense, not in a more modern egalitarian sense, but in the classic sense of the Trinity, in that the Son is derived from the Father, and the Spirit is, that both the Son and the Spirit are derived from the Father. In other words, they're all one essence, they're all eternal. But if you don't have the Father, then you don't have a Son. Like if you start with the analogy and against Praxeas, that the fountain, out of the fountain, the water comes forth and leads into a stream, and the stream leads into a pond, or light coming from the sun, or a tree coming from a root. Like in all these analogies, there's a first source and derivatives. And if you make those eternal, that's a good analogy for the Trinity. So if the fountain always... What's
Sorry
that?
to interrupt, but the Bible literally says that man comes from woman. Like it literally says that.
In that same passage, he says, well, let me get there. It's the same passage I'm talking about. So it's wrapping around, but let's start from the beginning. So if we start with the Trinity, like the one is derived from the other, and that's how you create an order. Not see, there's a problem in English in that we conflate the term command and order. Like order just means like an order, like first, second, third, fourth, fifth. Like in the Trinity sense, the one comes from the other. And in all of the Corinthian list, they derive from the one above. So that's why the Genesis account is so important in Paul's whole theology about gender, is because he sees God's initial creation of Adam first and the creation of woman second. That's an order. The Father is first, or primary is a better, because first is chronological. The Father is primary, and the Son comes from him, and man comes from him, and woman comes from him. And in that sense, what you have with submission is a way to reconcile, a way to set up an order for things to work. And so primarily, submission orders are a way of resolving potential conflict. And this makes people very uncomfortable, but I think it's literally what the Bible teaches about authority and why it's there, and why it's such a universally recognized thing around Jesus and his ministry, is that authority is an important concept, and authority and order are they're principles that ride together in the same car. And so so when you list those things out, so 1, 2, 3, 4, Father, Son, man, woman, like Paul does, the one comes from the other. Now, but submission never comes from the top down. God never made Jesus do anything. And Jesus has never, in my 20 years of knowing him, never made me do anything. And I can't ever make my wife do anything either. In all of those cases, when you look at submission, it's the principle of choosing to come under. Submission always starts from below and works its way up. When it starts from above and works its way down, it's called something entirely different. It's called coercion. And coercion uses force. and submission is a resignation of will. And so wherever force is being applied from the top down, you have a coercive structure. So wherever you have husbands telling wives, you must do X, Y, or Z, I don't care what it is, that if they're relying on force to accomplish that will, that's not a Christian perspective. That doesn't happen in any Christian theological framework. It can't, because coercion is the way the world works, not the way the kingdom works. So
And just if I could have you clarify, and you're not just talking here about physical force. You're
Right.
talking about any form of coercion where you're going to pay some type of penalty for displeasing me by failing to come under.
Right. So when you see Jesus walking around in his ministry, it's not that he can't speak truth. It's just that he has no force to compel. So when he sees the rich young ruler, he can lay out a command: go and sell all that you have and give to the poor. And he has zero power to force him to do so. There's nothing that he's compelling the rich young ruler to do that with. He can do it or he can not do it. If he does it, he'll find the blessings of walking in that order. If he doesn't, he'll have to find his own way. And that's how these orders always work. It's always that case. So would your wife be better following what you think? Maybe, maybe not. Is it something that doesn't matter? Maybe, maybe not. Those are things you guys have to work out. But the fact remains that a proper view of this style of headship, of leadership, the way that Christ models, is that submission always is a willful choice from looking below to above, never coercive power from above coming down. That's the world, always.
Okay.
So-
That's, I wish that I could sit in for the rest of this, but my guests are here. So do y'all mind if I give
Please.
a little feedback on what's happened so far? And then I'm going to
Go for it.
drop out and you can critique me while I'm not here. But I think I like a lot of what you said there, Matthew. I think one of the really key things that was kind of in the gaps that needs to be highlighted because of the abuses of the idea of the created order, the distortions of it that are used within toxic patriarchy, is this idea that when submission is offered, it's offered because of, like, this is inherent in the nature of the Father and the Son, and in their relationship. It's because the Father is who he is that the Son can have that kind of friction-free submission. That relationship between the Father and Son can be that way, and where the apostle says, submit yourselves to or be persuaded by those who have the rule over you. If you take the King James reading, he says, because they watch for your souls as those who need to give account, make it easy for them so they can, I'm paraphrasing, so they can do it joyfully. He specifically in that passage points out, he says that the reason for submitting, which again is a voluntary thing, he's requesting it of them, is because of the nature of their leaders. It's not because the position exists, but it's because you have this kind of leaders who are looking out for your souls, and therefore it's possible to have that kind of relationship with them. And this is why the Son has that kind of relationship with the Father. This is why the church can have the kind of submissive relationship it does with Christ, because Christ is trustworthy. The trustworthiness of the one being submitted to is the other side of this equation. If someone doesn't trust me, if my wife, for example, doesn't trust me, then she cannot submit of her own free will. The only reason she would submit to something where she thought I was leading in a wrong direction would be because of some form of coercion. If she doesn't trust me, and that's why the husband is told to serve and honor and cherish and nurture, protect his wife the way Christ does the church, because it's that Christ-like nature that actually makes one worthy of free submission. And free submission is something that someone is going to want to offer up when you are providing Christ-like leadership. It's part of it. It's a dual thing. And so, and the same thing goes for, Christ-like leadership. Christ doesn't, force his leadership on people who don't want to follow him. They make their choice about that. And so you cannot lead if you don't have a follower that's in on the project, that's willingly taking that role. And you cannot follow of your free will if you don't have a leader that's made himself trustworthy. So this is really, really key to smashing the abuses of the scripture in these kinds of discussions, because when some of the work that I'm trying to do in some of our friends and some of you as well, I think, in domestic violence and confronting it and domestic abuse in Christian circles is based on an understanding of a created order, in which there's not an understanding that this only works as a whole relationship, like David was talking about, but rather people are being told, here's your role. You do this role regardless what someone else in the relationship is doing. And that's simply not possible. Those roles only work if they're both happening. And so if we just stop teaching the idea that these roles can be independent, that leadership and submission, as the scripture teaches, are something that one can do by themselves, then a lot of these abuses evaporate, and we get we get harmony and we get a one thing, like David said, we get a marriage that works like that reflects the nature of the Father and the Son, where nobody's being subjugated. I think we need to I think the word that is used in abusive takes on this, the definition that's poured into the word submission would more properly be the word subjugation. That's what people are talking about. And there's no place in Christianity for anyone to subjugate anyone else. All like Matthew said, I think that's beautifully put. All the submission goes upward voluntarily, and nurture and love and support and protection flows downward to those who want it, and is not forced on those who don't. And that's the framework I think the scripture lays out. So pick it up and take it from there, guys.
Yeah. Could
All right.
I just ask a
Good
couple
night, bro.
before you go, or are you?
Sure. I'll take the time to answer some.
Okay. Yeah.
clarifications.
Just a couple. Number one is, I guess I would take a little bit issue with what you said as far as submission is willingly given, because it's not submitting if you want to do it. Like the reason submission exists is because there's a clash between wills, and you see that in the garden where Jesus submits to the will of the Father. He doesn't want to, like from a human perspective, but he's willing to. And I think that's what you're saying. You're talking about a willingness that even though this isn't my way, because I trust you and because I believe you have my good in mind, I'm willing to lay aside what I would want to do. Is that
so yes, I guess in an ideal, in the platonic ideal of the marriage relationship, it might work that way. But for me, the reality in my marriage, the way it works out is that there are times, when one or the other of us doesn't necessarily approve of the choices the other one is making.
Mhm.
And we choose to let that go. Like we are still somehow individual people on one level, even though we're also part of one thing. And so I have never run into that moment where I say, okay, you don't want to do this, but I'm going to ask you to, as where I have to basically pull rank.
I'm
like,
not telling, I'm asking you to do this.
Yes. Like I've never had to pull rank, and I never intend to do so.
Mhm.
So because I don't think it's that kind of a thing. And Abigail doesn't want to take the leadership in our home. So,
Mhm.
that's I guess maybe there would be, I can't really picture another situation than that because I've not been in one. But what I think what we need to temper that idea of like Jesus in the garden with the fact that the relationship, the level of that relationship, the degree to which a wife can trust her husband is tempered by the degree to which the husband can be like Christ.
So
So I'm
if I'm hearing,
what's that?
if I could restate what I'm hearing you say, basically, what I'm hearing you say is, imagine, a continuum or whatever, where you have on one side you have the ultimate trust of Christ in his Father, because his Father is perfect and Christ is perfect, and that makes room then for the radical submission of Christ to lay down his very life. But if you're on the other end of that scale and there's very little trust because the care and the love and the nurture is there, there's not going to be as high of a level of ability to submit to that, because that level of trust isn't there. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Right. Because submission is voluntary, because it's willing. Then in the absence of, if there really is an absence of coercion, the trust and the submission is only going to come up to the level of worthiness of the object of that submission. And my level of worthiness, probably on this side of eternity, is not going to be 100%. I'm certainly not, the ideal perfect reflection of Christ now. And so it would be absurd and it'd be logically impossible for my wife to offer 100% submission to me, because I'm not 100% trustworthy. I don't 100% reflect Christ, so our relationship cannot 100% reflect the relationship between Christ and the church. But again, there's an ideal. There's an ideal where there's this, we're working toward it. That's what the apostle is holding up. As each one does their part, it's a virtuous cycle that feeds itself. And the opposite is true as well. If I begin to rely on, if I begin to reach out, or you read my wife's mail, as our friend Chris Moles says, and start reading all the verses that are for her, and relying on that to get us through strife or to resolve conflicts, then my level of trustworthiness is going to drop. Her ability to submit is not going to rise. I may be able to rely on some level of subjugation, but that's not going to create a relationship that reflects Christ in the church. And so that goes the other way. So we're looking for a virtuous spiral toward something that looks more and more and more like the relationship between the Father and Son and Christ in the church, I think.
So
I think that's a great way to put it.
So this depiction that Paul has there in Ephesians 5 is not so much a command. as a here's the order, here's what it's supposed to look like, and the two of you in cooperation with each other are to work toward that perfect ideal of the perfect submission, the perfect love. And those two aren't happening necessarily independently of each other, but I use the term in one of my lives, an Ouroboros, this thing that's continually feeding on itself.
Mhm.
And then obviously men, as the head, the command is like, you're the ones that are driving this. It's your responsibility to be pouring the love that raises the trust, to bring the submission that makes the whole thing turn.
You're
You're
muted,
muted.
Anthony.
We know sociologically that, at least I believe the data demonstrates this, that women look for men who are reliable and trustworthy. Women want, again, there are outliers, but they don't erase the pattern that in general, that's the kind of person your wife wants to be with. That's the kind of, like, she doesn't want, in general, wives, if they're given the opportunity to live with someone who's trustworthy, protective, strong, nurturing, listens when she needs to listen, empowers her in every way possible. Like a woman who wants to be with someone like that. These are, and that's what the leadership role actually means, is that my character should actually naturally draw out the response in my character as a man should draw out the response in a woman, that tends toward that ideal relationship. If she's swimming upstream to love me the way the scripture teaches, then, at least if that's the rule, that she's swimming upstream, then I'm doing something really wrong, and I need to, again, not read her mail, but pay attention to what's going on with me.
I think that I really appreciate that whole notion of we're either in our relationships as husbands and wives, we're either perpetuating a more Christ-like model, or we're downward spiraling in ever increasing difficulty. What the only caveat I would add, and I know why we say it, because abuse has been perpetuated, like, by this notion that, if your husband is a malevolent tyrant monster, if you just submit enough, everything will go well with you. And that's terrible. The church and the authorities and a lot of other people ought to be intervening in those situations. Even if he's just a jerk, the church should be intervening in those situations. But I will say this, I think that we do have to leave room for the opportunity to minister to each other in weakness, especially in marriage. Like, it has been the case that my loving leadership has brought my wife into a better form of submission with the agenda of the family and us forward. And it has been the case that her gentle submission has pulled me back from wrong thinking. Like, we have an ability to affect and minister one another. And Peter speaks specifically to this. I don't think Peter is condoning abuse. I don't think Peter is pointing out Sarah's example because he wants women to be doormats. But I do think that we have an opportunity and a grace, especially in our marriages, to use our particular path, our particular perspective as men or women, to minister in the marriage. That doesn't exonerate anybody's. That doesn't exonerate women from being callous and not listening to anybody and running off their own ways, and it doesn't exonerate men from being tyrants and jerks. But we can minister to one another. You're muted.
One more thing before I go, to add to that idea of the virtuous or vicious spiral, is that there's something at the bottom of that spiral as well. Like, we are actually being formed into the image of the demonic or to the image of the divine. And that's really important for being that we are all men on this podcast, for men to be aware of, is that when you resort to coercive, to coercion, to forcing, to overriding
Force.
the will. Yeah. To overriding the will of someone else because you're bigger, faster, have a better social position, the church is going to back you up, whatever it is. When we resort to that, we are doing what Satan does.
It's Antichrist.
Yes, it is Antichrist, and we are moving the relationship down toward the abyss instead of up toward the heavens. And so, and that's really, really important to understand, because when that happens, the more we do that, the more openings we have in our lives for all kinds of other, weeds of sin and things to grow. And that's why when you find coercive, abusive relationships, you virtually always find all manner of more commonly recognized sexual immorality and things like that right alongside it. I've never heard of those things existing independently.
Mhm.
I mean, I've never heard of that kind of authority existing in a morally clean life otherwise, because you are playing in the devil's playground when you use authority in the way that the devil does, to take away people's freedom of choice,
Right.
to get what you want.
So,
So
and I know you gotta go, so I don't wanna hold you further. Maybe this is maybe one of the other two can answer if you want to. So then, like, take the two extremes. Okay, so let's take the bad actor husband who we're all familiar with. You have to listen to me because the Bible says it, and so you have to, whatever it is. The incredibly common story we've all heard 1,000 times. No matter how much she submits, it's not going to change their marriage for the better. In fact, it's probably going to drag it down further. Would we also say that the other is true, that if you had the perfect self-sacrificing husband, but you have a wife that is completely self-serving and he's pouring that into her, that it would have the same deadening effect? Or is one of those things not like the other?
Hey, I think I know where you were going with that, but somebody was ringing a phone next to me. So, were you asking, David, if a husband that's using coercive, destructive authority damages his wife's spiritual life?
Well, that's good. That's obvious. But what I'm saying is, so we look at a wife and say, if your husband is being abusive and horrible, you submitting to him is enablement. And it's not gonna raise the marriage. Like, you just do your part and somehow it's gonna make him better. It's
Right.
not. In fact, everything shows us how it's getting worse. Is the same true if you have a wife that's a bad actor, that the husband is pouring love and loving as his own self or whatever? Is the flip side of that true, that also is enabling and whatever? Or is that the side that if the husband takes that responsibility, that it has the potential to raise the marriage? Or and I'm not asking this with an agenda. I'm legit curious if one of those if pulling the one lever without the other one being pulled pulls the marriage down. Is the mirror that true?
So I will really want to hear what the rest of you guys have to say about this, but I'm going to cut out of here. So I'm just going to try to give a brief response and then leave. But I would say that because we're talking about a hierarchy, that actually is not the case. That's not mutually true. The father makes his sun rise on the evil and his rainfall on the evil and on the good, on the just and on the unjust. The generosity that's flowing down the hierarchy is unconditional. That's what leadership is about, is that you continue to bless whether those who are in a position to receive that blessing are interested or not. and so there was one other little connected point that I thought I might make, but yeah, I guess I've taken over the conversation long enough now. So
the responsibility on the husband to love as Christ loves his church is there regardless, because that's flowing down. But
Because
her
that's-
responsibility to submit is contingent on that flowing. Is that what you're saying?
that's what I believe. Yes.
And I would agree. I think that and it has its limits. I mean, there's a place of unbelief where spouses can separate. The
Mhm.
unbeliever can choose to leave,
Right.
but the greater responsibility to make sure things go the right way is on the man, the headship order.
Mhm. So this is a greater, like, this is where that order thing comes from, is God looks at the man, at the husband, and says, it's got to start with you, flowing from you.
Yeah, and I think that's modeled even in the gospel itself. Like, Jesus has come to save the world. It's not,
Mhm.
it doesn't work perfectly, but his benevolence and what he's doing is affecting every place.
Mhm.
So if I could take us back, I want to do, and this is actually me trying to do some PR for you tonight, Matthew. If I could take us back to the question, I just want a straight answer.
I like being a villain, Titus.
So can you affirm these two statements in a situation like the example I gave? And I want to be clear, like, Brenda has reasons for not getting vaccinated. For one, she probably still has natural immunity because she most likely had COVID, and has other reasons too. Now, I obviously don't think they're good enough reasons that I agree, but she is thinking clearly as well. But in this example, would it be wrong? I want to just hear a yes or no answer. Would it be wrong for me to say, based on my understanding of what these vaccines, how they provide protection, would it be wrong for me to say, Brenna, I love you, and I'm gonna have to pull rank here. I wouldn't use those terms. So I'm just gonna have to tell you to go get vaccinated. Would that be wrong for me? Number one, and number two, if I did that, and generally, other than that, I was a great husband, but I did that. Would Brenna be sinning if she did not get the vaccine? Because these are the real life examples that I think are more important. Like, we can agree on a lot of the foundational stuff. Like, sure, abuse is horrible. Like, we all agree to that. But like, I think what people's concerns are these like how does this ideology actually flesh itself out in real life examples? And I tried to find something that was kind of on the edge, which is why, I mean, I personally don't think it's on the edge. I think it would be very wrong for me to do it, and I don't think she would need to do it if I told her to. But I'm curious, because I think it's kind of on the edge for you guys. I'm curious how you guys would respond to that.
I don't respond to the question, is it sin, very well, because it's a dumb question. Like, I don't think that there's black and white lines in the sand where if you do a certain action, you're in sin. If you don't, you're not. There's far too much complexity in these kinds of dynamic relationships for that kind of evaluation. What I would say in answer to your question, though, is if you think it's an important matter as a leader to your wife, what I would say is, I think as your husband, I think this is really important that you do it. I understand your objections. I'm not trying to force you or compel you in any way, but as your husband, as somebody who loves you dearly more than anybody else on earth, I would love to see you do this. And I think it's really important. And here's why. You're going to have to make your own decision, because that's how I see Jesus presenting his case to the people that he's
Sure.
speaking to.
But in the case of Jesus, if I disobey Jesus, I will go to hell. So that's my question. If Brendan disobeys
you're such a Mennonite. That's not how it works.
But yeah, if you disobey Jesus consistently, you'll go to hell.
Okay, if every time you have that conversation with your wife, she's always saying, no, I'm going to go my own way, then yeah, there's some serious problems.
But what I'm saying is the analogy is not perfect because
Have you ever had a situation where you felt like Jesus was nudging you one way and you didn't go that way? Did you feel like you were going to hell, or did you feel like you failed and you had to come back and set it in order?
Okay, so that's a really good response. I don't think it's a perfect analogy. Like if I certainly have nudged Brenna to get the vaccine, and it's not like a little bit later she needs to be convicted and go do that. That's what I'm saying is not true. If Jesus nudged me to do something, the response for me is always to do it. Like if he nudges me to do something, I should always do it. Whether
I think it would be.
let's leave that on the
I
table.
think it would be better if you think it's an important matter for your home for your wife to listen to you, unless she has very strong objections, and then you guys have to talk about that. So all this stuff has a tiered priority. Like if that's whether or not we buy roast beef or chicken, then you're dumb for pushing it around. Like it doesn't matter. And so you have to evaluate for your home, like what are the risk factors? Like what are her reasons for saying no? Does she have health factors? Like all that has to be evaluated in this scenario. Like it's not a black or white. I don't think that you as the husband just get to say, I'm the boss, go do what you say or you're in sin. I also don't think that a wife can just continually say, I'm not listening to you, I'm going my own way. Neither of those extremes are acceptable.
I'm trying to find the distinction between us, and Drew's
because you're a Mennonite.
No, I think it's important. Not that I'm trying to like divide with you or whatever on a certain issue. I'm just trying to see where the differences actually are. So what I hear you saying is if I nudge, which I have nudged her to get the vaccine, probably more than that, and she's choosing not to get it, and I think that perfectly fine for her to do that in situations like this. I think it would be wrong for me to not be fine with that. I think what I'm hearing you say is it would be better in this situation for her to go get vaccinated. Is that correct? Is that a fair representation?
I mean, if you take all the like specifics apart and just say case X, husband thinks it is best for the family, case Y, wife thinks this is better, and there's a conflict between those two wills, it's better if nobody's being forced for the wife to submit in her place of order and say, hey, I'm not being asked to sin. It's not wrong to do it. I just want to follow my husband.
So here's another example of this, and this is what I mean by mutual submission. When we were in India, Brenna wanted Zion, our kid, to drink like super safe water, like safe to the nth degree, right? So filtered twice or whatever the situation was. I'm like, yeah, he shouldn't drink water out of a puddle, but he'll be fine. And in that situation, because Brenna is more emotionally connected to our child, she like at least when they're that young, I think the mother is, and it's more her thing to make sure this baby stays safe. Like that's a mothering instinct. Even though I think she's wrong, I submit to her in that situation. And this goes for a lot of things, like we sell puppies, and that's kind of her business that she does. So if she says something like in regard to that, like I think she's more skilled in that area, so I'm going to submit. So we submit to each other basically based on who has more experience in a certain field, who has more expertise, and it happens fairly organically. Now, having said that, she submits more often than I do. That's based partially on personality, but it's also based on what she believes in Scripture. So I do think, like I said earlier, there's more submission that needs to happen on the side of the wife. But I'm trying to bring up these examples because, like with examples like the vaccine example, I think I would be wrong to to push that on her. And I think
it's a bad example because you don't really think it's that important.
I do actually. I certainly do.
You don't if you think it's fine that she goes her own way. Like if it was a moral imperative, like, okay, let's put the scenario a little bit different. Let's say all of the health factors lead towards like risk factors for, I don't know, your parents live with you and they're immune compromised. I don't care. Create the scenario where there's just like 900 reasons why it's morally dangerous to take the risk to not be vaccinated, and those are real risks, and you're like, babe, we got to do this. Like, my parents live here. We're in the middle of an outbreak. I know that we're going to get sick, and I know that you're going to cause the death of my mother if you don't get vaccinated and she's living here. you really need to do this. I still don't think you can force her. But in that case, do you think she should listen? How much more persuasive would you be in your leadership if that was the case, instead of like, hey, here's all the general, like, I'm for it and you're against it, and it's kind of a wash, and I'm not really that insistent. I just think it would be better.
I actually, well, in that situation, I think she would get it without me pushing her. I actually am, like, I think everyone listening to this call should go get vaccinated right now if you're not vaccinated. I think the fact that Christians are not getting vaccinated is horrible. Like, I'm very passionate about this. I'm also passionate about husbands not wielding like abusive authority over their wives, which is why I think my wife is fine. Like, I don't think she's fine, but I think she's fine. If that
It's
makes
also
sense.
not
I
a
do want
moral
to move
peril.
on from this example, though. I'm tired. I don't know if she wants us talking about.
Yeah,
this
I don't
much.
mean to drag your wife. It would have been better to talk about case X, but I think the question of leadership in the home and headship has to do with these factors. It's not just, you don't just get to pick willy-nilly. Like, I think things that are morally imperative, things that have to do with the spiritual direction of your home, we have to have more finesse and more leadership skills. Like, I don't care what we have for supper. I don't care about a lot of things. And God doesn't care about a lot of things. God doesn't care if I wear an orange shirt or a blue shirt. Like, he just doesn't care. That doesn't mean he's a poor leader or I'm bad at submitting. It just means there's a whole bunch of things that just plain don't matter. And then there's an escalating tier of how much things matter. And as you go up, as you ascend up the importance, it's more important that the leadership and submission dynamic is in place, the more is at risk on any given decision.
But ultimately, like, and in the case you gave, like drinking the water and stuff, I guess it's going to come down to, in that case, I feel like for me, that's loving her as my own body. If I don't think it's important, I don't think it's that big of a deal, but she does. Like, sometimes to me, it's a matter of balancing. Like, this is super important to you and not very important to me. Well, then, like, why would I go and push it? But the issue comes when it's really super important to both of us. And now what do we do? But at the same time, I think this is a rule, and I haven't lived this out perfectly in my marriage. I mean, there have been times where I would look back and I've gone back and had to make it right and say, you know what, I shouldn't have pulled rank on you like that. I shouldn't have pushed you like that. Because every time that I've done that, it hasn't been the right decision. Not even because I was wrong, but
gotta listen to your wife.
But because it's not loving her as my own body. It's not, like, if she's doing it because she feels like she has to do it, because she's been pushed into it, then I pretty much, as a rule, that's a demonstration I haven't been the leader that I should have been, because it shouldn't have come to that. We should have figured out some way that we can both feel good about where we're coming out. Like, that's the gold standard. And obviously there's going to be the times when those conflicts come, but that picture of coming together, and if she feels like she's being taken care of, then she can look at me, and I think this is really important with the submission aspect, that yes, there is that call to submit, but if that submission is part of me looking at her and say, you know what, Treva, I know you don't see it this way, but I care about you, and this is where I see it, and I think this is so important for this, that I think it's really important for you to do it, even if you don't see it. And if the relationship has been at the point where she actually trusts that I can see around the corner that she's not seeing around, because that's what I've lived out, and that's the care that I've shown, and it's not just about a self-serving agenda, she's more likely to be able to look and say, hey, I trust you. I hear where you're coming from. I'm willing to do that. You know, I'm willing to take the vaccine or whatever. But like, I still think that's an incredibly rare situation to be in, because you should be able to find out what's somewhere we can come out that we both feel good about.
So let me back at you, Titus. I pushed already on why it should be that the scriptures lean
You're frozen for me. Is he frozen for you, Dave?
Yeah, frozen for me too.
Even if I granted your mutual submission to the scripture, am I still
Maybe
cutting out?
start the spiel over.
Am I with you now?
You're
You're
yes.
good now.
If let's push a little bit on back the other way. I already mentioned why should it be the case that the scriptures lean 9 times out of 10 on women's submission, even if we grant the mutual submission case, which I don't grant, but if we did for the sake of argument, why is it? So I've articulated why I think I see this source of order in the Trinity. Why do you think women wear head coverings? Why do you think women are spoken of so often in the scriptures? Like, it's not an isolated case and it's not grasping at straws. There's a lot of text about this order of relationship and where women and men fit into it respectively. How do you sort out why that is from the scriptural arguments?
I haven't actually looked into that much. I'm not really prepared to answer that. I did agree that there is a basis for it in God himself and in the cosmos and for both the head covering and for these things. Now, how all that works out, I know people get really mad at you when you start talking about this. I don't know why they get so mad, to be honest. I think you've maybe stretched it a little too far in some cases, and but I don't really. I have a whole bunch of other things I wanted to talk about, but that's not one of the things I'm really prepared to talk about.
Well, it's an important place to begin because why it should be is an important perspective. Like, we read all these verses about where women fit into this order and men respectively, and like there has to be some kind of underlying principle to approach these with if we're going to make heads or tails of why it should be.
Mhm.
Sure. So, I mean, if you look at studies about the differences between men and women, men are generally more aggressive, women are more nurturing. So I think there's differences beside genitalia, and that could be one of the reasons why these things are spelled out the way they are in scripture. I don't know if that's a very simple answer, but
No, I think it's
got.
good. I mean, I think that's where I begin my approach to these issues too, is rooted in biology. And it's not just in genitalia, but it's also in bone mass and muscle mass and testosterone versus estrogen and what they do in the body and how they shape who we are and what our identities are. And there again, you still have these questions of outliers, but we have 90% of people that fit within pretty standard domains just biologically. And so I'm just grasping at numbers. I don't know what it is, but the super majority of people all fit within these domains. Like, testosterone does something to your body. Estrogen does something to your body. Like, bone mass and size make a difference in how we experience the world and what we can and can't do. So I think those are indicators of why God created us such. I mean, the fact that women are created to bear life, and that men with their hairy faces and hairy bodies and increased muscle mass and the capacity to work, like, speaking the ancient world's perspective, like, it makes sense to me looking at the creation that one of these members is supposed to go out and provide for a place so that there's somewhere safe to raise young. Like, just the continuation of the species, like, biologically speaking, outside of theology, like, that all makes sense. If that's the case and that's a part of the created order, then that's a place to begin looking at why is our psychological and spiritual makeup, how does it relate to that kind of order?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about a few other things. I was about a third through my spiel, and then we got derailed for an hour. So maybe I'll do a little monologuing here of my own. But the reason why most of my memes are targeting the patriarchy and the reason why I have been lumped with the left on this issue probably is because I think that what we emphasize matters. And this is my primary critique of the patriarchalists, that it's a matter of misdirected emphasis. So if you look at like what the New Testament was trying to do in a lot of cases in this conversation in relation to their context, like it was pretty radical stuff. Like the fact that, and it's even radical in our day, the fact that Paul talked about coworkers for the gospel. Like I never hear conservative like Mennonites, for example, or Kingdom Christians hardly ever talk about my coworker for the gospel and then name a lady. Like if someone at KFW got up, even if like Finney got up at KFW and was like talking about this amazing coworker he has for the gospel and named a woman and said how great she was doing, that would be kind of like there would be some raised eyebrows, I think.
Let me stop you because I do that. I just spent the last 2 weeks utterly dependent on the radical, powerful, dynamic ministry of single women. Like single women have been integral to my ability to do any kind of ministry in the church in the last year.
So I think that's good. So all the folks listening who hate Matthew, you listen up when he says some things like that and give him some points.
I don't think he didn't. I just had to look. He didn't refer to him as his coworkers. He referred to him as his homegirls. But
got it. So that's one example.
If you look into Greek, it's the same. It really is the same
word.
Yeah. So that's one example. There's a bunch more examples, like the fact that when all the disciples had fled from the scene of the crucifixion, there's these women who stuck with Jesus. The women were the first ones to discover the empty tomb and were the first apostles in a sense. And if you determine an apostle by people who are bearing the good news of the resurrection of Jesus, the fact that Jesus was financially supported by women, the fact that he even had female followers.
Mm-hmm.
So it's Paul. There you go. See, Matthew's helping us out, everybody. So if our posture is just hammering male headship, I think that's tone deaf for a couple of reasons. Like with the Me Too movement, and I know you guys stand against sexual abuse vehemently. So I'm not accusing you of this, but I think at least in the controversy in the Dank Kingdom, as you guys do come across as like just hammering the headship. And I think that can be tone deaf in a society where there's the Me Too movement, where there's tons of abuse, and especially with like this idea of the upside down kingdom, where most of what we do is challenge power, like, and point out abuses to power. Like that's a very Christian thing to do. And another parallel to this is like church leadership. So I never hear you preaching sermons, you or Finney preaching sermons about like, dude, church leaders are an authority and you've got to submit, right? I've never really heard that. In fact, like in our Followers of the Way Church in Richmond, like there were some things that you were very strongly trying to prescribe that we ended up not doing, and there was no consequences. So, and maybe you think we should have done those things. You probably do.
I do, but
so, but my point is the posture Followers of the Way has toward most power structures, towards church leadership, and there's a lot in Scripture about obeying your leaders, seems to be different and out of line with this like pushing and pumping male headship all the time. And it seems out of line with the kingdom worldview in general. So I'm just saying maybe the emphasis should change, and we should be really careful about how we do this. Like I think we're careful about how we talk about LGBT, like we believe in traditional marriage, yes, but we're not going to be railing on gay rights all the time. Like, because, I mean, those people were oppressed historically and are oppressed and marginalized today, and we care about them and love them, and Christians generally don't have a good rep with how they relate to the gay community. So we want to be sensitive about that. Or even the race conversation. Like we're not constantly railing against CRT, even if we disagree with CRT, because that's tone deaf. And I think the same holds true for this conversation.
So I think that's a very good critique, and it deserves an answer. I think it's a matter of perspective. So what my experience is, like my vantage point in the church and in the world and where I live, is that living in a post-sexual revolution, post-Christian world, the ideas that the Bible expresses and espouses about gender and about what our identity is in the context of marriage is a countercultural message. And it doesn't have the ring. Like if I lived in the 50s, maybe I'd agree with your perspective. Like I think that in the post 60s world, like in the women's lib world that we live in Western civilization, to say that there is an order that men and women fit in, especially within a marriage, is exactly the kind of jarring statement that the apostles were making in the first century and would make again today. I mean, the problem with your perspective is that what you're saying would be 100 times more impactful to Paul in the first century. Yet he wrote all these things that he wrote. And so there must be some way that we can espouse and endorse these things, especially in the church, like in a public platform perspective, and say there is an order to how these things are supposed to work. These things are what they are. And here's how we counteract the potential abuses and problems with those structures. Like, I do talk about church authority, actually talk about it quite a bit. It's just that I think there's supposed to be a balanced perspective. So when I feel like I'm in an environment where everybody's railing against the patriarchy and everybody's got a case that they want to make for why women don't have to submit, I want to lay out the case for why they should. Like, that's why the dynamic is what it is in the DKCM world, especially in that world, because it's been the Free Sisters controversy for the last year.
Well, I mean, you could say the same thing about the race conversation. Like, there's definitely a lot of folks who have gotten pretty goofy on the left about race, and yet I still don't see you railing against CRT. Like if you really want to be a rebel about race, go be a Candace Owens. Like, they're the ones standing against the flood of culture right now.
I don't agree, but I don't agree with that. Like, I'm not saying that I say things that I don't agree with if they're controversial. I'm saying that some of the things I believe are controversial and some of them aren't. And I think an even keel of the scripture, not far be it from me to call myself the even keel. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that where I feel like representation for truth is needed, I want to speak to it. And I don't feel like those things are out of balance. Like, I don't feel like the two are the same case for a whole host of reasons, like race and gender.
So if we compare this, I think a better comparison might be with church leadership. So suppose that virtually every church just abandoned church leadership for the most part and was pretty organic about how that, like, well, let's say they believe that the positions of church leadership were not offices, but were more just functional gifts. And you believe that they're offices. Like, would you be doing the same thing in
Absolutely.
that situation?
And in similar, and again, just because I do this doesn't mean it's right or balanced, but I do the same thing with the word bishop. Like, everybody in the plain world has been hurt by a bishop. I won't shy away from the word bishop. It's a biblical word, and I don't believe in giving up those terms because they've been abused. I believe there's principles about the bishopric and about what that title means and how it functions in the Bible that have to be vindicated and espoused. So if I'm going into, like, where I come from in Oregon, a hotbed of home churchy, like, loosey-goosey libertarian fellowship meetings that have no structure, no governance, and no discipline, of course, I'm gonna talk about the bishopric and what it means to have elders and deacons and how to organize ourselves and what it means to submit yourselves to the leaders. Like, that function is important. In the case of church leadership, like, I don't have a whole lot of room to talk about bishops. Like, it's not something I can come crashing around about. We don't even have bishops in our churches. Like, there's a process that the church is going through that disposes me to speak about those things in certain terms. Like, to develop, this is way past the scope of this conversation, but to be developing new churches as a church planter in infant stages where they don't have bishops because of the way we articulate church ecclesiology, like, we don't approach those issues that way. But they're very important that those structures be there and be understood and be maintained and provided for.
Okay. One more thing I wanted to press you on, and then I'm through my notes. So I've heard you talk about 1 Corinthians 11, and this
Right.
comes down to followers the way and how women don't ask questions in Boston but do in Richmond. In 1 Corinthians 11, I've heard you say that the prophesying that happens with the covered head is not in the context of a church meeting, correct?
Say that again now. In
The
1 Corinthians 11,
prophesying-
it's not talking about the meeting.
Correct. When it talks about women prophesying with their heads covered.
I mean, it's not speaking specifically of the meeting.
Okay, but you assume that it's not because women can't prophesy in meetings, right?
I don't think women can speak in the church. Yeah.
So that would include prophesying. Okay, so the first half of 1 Corinthians 11 is not about a church gathering. The second half of the passage is about the Eucharist, right? So,
Mhm.
and I've heard Finney do this too, where he tries to make a big deal out of like the way that chapter is sectioned off, and he's clearly talking about something new when he gets into the Eucharist. And therefore, like, definitely women can't speak in the Eucharist.
Well, he
Here's the
says when
weird
you
thing.
gather together
At the beginning of the
in
second
verse
half
17.
of the chapter.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So there you go. And this is the trap I'm pulling you into. So here's the weird thing is that Followers of the Way allows women to speak during the Eucharist. That's the half of the service that they are allowed to speak in. So that doesn't make any sense to me. And what I'm saying by this is there is an arbitrary cutting off point at some level. So in Richmond, like, we haven't made a hard and fast rule that during the public meeting that women cannot speak or ask questions. And I think what you would say is, well, you're not obeying the Bible. They're clearly not allowed to speak or ask questions. They need to allow their husband at home. To which I would say, no, you're just making that line a little further back. Women can speak during the Eucharist, which is certainly like the central part of the gathering. I assume they can. They can in most Boston churches.
Yeah, sure.
So like, so why are you making, or I guess my point is, like, you can't have it both ways with 1 Corinthians 11, number one, and number two, to make the point that, like, at some level you're not following that extremely like totally literally either if you're allowing women to speak during agape.
I don't think that the prohibition of speaking in the assembly has anything to do with that. It has to do with the church giving a teaching and a proclamation. Like, the church is speaking authoritatively in that meeting in 1 Corinthians 12 and 14.
It's not
Like,
about speaking authoritatively. It's about asking questions. You're not even allowed to ask questions.
No,
if take
you
that
don't understand
literally.
what I'm saying. Part of that meeting, the public assembly where the church gives teaching, and so we have records of this going back to Justin Martyr, like how the Christian meeting has functioned historically speaking. There's an intimate family gathering, the love feast. That's the table, and after that, well, or sometimes before, depending on whenever, there's a public pronunciation of what the church teaches and believes. And in that part where the church is making a declaration of this is official truth of the church, women aren't supposed to speak. It's a clear distinction. Like, that's why it would be so.
So that might be the case in the early church. I don't have the
Well,
references for that.
it's true in
but-
Corinthians too.
No. Well, okay. Let me ask you this. In Corinthians, I see something much more organic happening, where there's a tongue, there's an interpretation, there's a prophecy. I don't see like this sectioning off of the Lord's Supper from an authoritative teaching time.
Okay,
I
so
feel like it's,
where are women not supposed to speak then? Because he does say that.
I don't know.
You're the one that has a
all
problem,
I'm
not
saying
me.
is- all I'm saying is you're not being completely consistent. And
Well,
here's
So
actually
you're not
why
at
I-
all consistent, and I'm not completely
There
consistent.
you go. This is actually why I am not extremely hard on egalitarians, because they say, oh, the prohibition of women teaching was cultural. Well, I'm kind of doing the same thing with women speaking, and I think you are too, in some sense, because you're letting them speak during agape. So I'm not saying I have the answer for that text. I just don't think that like that you can be extremely dogmatic about the way Followers of the Way is applying it as like if you don't do this, you're clearly in disobedience, because like it's not that simple.
Let me rise
Straws.
to, because I've had this conversation with Matthew on other issues. So I'm going to rise a little bit to Matthew's defense, because I'm not his homeboy, I'm his fanboy. So I guess that's the same thing. Well, maybe both. But I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Matthew, because I'm kind of speaking for you. My perspective on that is not so much that I've never gotten the idea from Followers of the Way that their interpretation is the only one. Now, if you push them on it, they're going to say, here's why we believe it. But they're saying the verse means something. And so this is what we think the verse means. Now, if your church thinks the verse means something else, we're probably not going to quibble about that. We may be like, well, we're not really sure because of this hermeneutic or because of what the patristics said or whatever, but it means something. You have some time in your service where this prohibition on women speaking applies.
Right.
And if you just have the time, you have a 10-minute time or a 5-minute time where you're like, this is where this proclamation's made, where women are silent, like where you're living that out. That's
Yeah.
what it's more about, rather than you take it to the extreme. Because now we're just talking about we're talking about a movable boundary, but the issue is, do you think it means what it says? And then we can debate how we're going to apply what it means. Like,
So
am I here?
yeah, that's a good point. I have a proposal that just popped into my head, but I'm curious, does your Mennonite church apply that in any way?
Well, we don't, what ladies, like, nobody asks questions during the sermon, and it's not a lady
So the
talking.
women give testimonies.
Right. But
Right.
then afterward, women would give testimonies, and followers of the way wouldn't you have a time where women can share something the Lord did for them or whatever? I don't know. I've never.
Well, we would use the agape time for that.
Okay. So like there is a time for that. And
So I think, go ahead.
this is why this subject is frustrating to me, because Paul says what he says. And the very fact, even if you said, look, we want to leave things open for the women to be able to minister as much as we can, but we also want to follow what the Bible teaches. And so we're going to have a 2-minute period where women are not allowed to talk, just because we want to make sure we're fulfilling what it says. The free crowd would have a major issue with that and find it offensive just for the sake that that thing exists. And I have an issue with that. That's one of my big deals. It's like, it's not okay to look, and we're not even trying, like, all we want to do is make sure that base is covered, and that's not good enough. Like, can you not see
Yeah.
what
I get it. Here's a proposal I have that just popped into my head. It seems like the situation, at least in one of those texts, is women were like interrupting. Maybe I'm wrong there, but so what if you would say that, okay, women are not supposed to teach or hold authority over men, so there's a time when a man is teaching, the women don't interrupt that time, don't ask questions, don't like usurp authority, but afterward, like if you want to share a testimony or something that blessed you from the sermon, or even clarify something, that would be okay. Would that be an acceptable way to apply that to you, Matthew? Or would you think
I don't think it would, because the specifics that he mentions there are, if the women have questions, they should ask at home. Like he wants that to run back through the home channels. Like, if you have questions about the church's teaching, go talk about it at your table. And I don't think that's wrong to say.
What
Like,
about
there's a way to vet that. There's a way to vet that conversation through the household, and I don't think that's an insult to women. It says, let's make this an in-house issue. If dear sister, if you have a question about the church's teaching, like we're at the Sunday meeting and the church says something and you think, I'm not sure if that's so, does the Bible teach that? Paul's saying, ask your husband. And I don't think it's because women are inferior. I think it's because he wants to keep the order. Like, talk about it as a group, talk about it as a couple, sit at your table, ask that question, vet it out, look at the scriptures as a home. And then if the question needs to be brought forward, then bring it forward. That's a process through which these things can work. And I just don't have any problem saying he said that. That's a good way to do it.
So
would you be okay with it? Yeah, there you go. That was my one question. My other question was, if after the main service closes and you're sitting around the living room talking, would you be offended if a single girl or even a married woman came up and asked you a question?
No, it happens all the time.
So what's the difference? Because I mean, how is headship suddenly not the whole argument you made was about order and headship and the way things should happen. Why does suddenly this arbitrary cutoff point where the service is over change that?
Because there is a text that tells us how to behave in that specific environment. Like, there's a decorum for that specific area. Like, when we're in this place together, when the church is speaking in declarative ways, like the church is the pillar and the ground of truth, and there's supposed to be an assumption that when we speak, like, there is a channel to vet and ask questions. The brothers can try things, they can ask questions, whatever the case is. but there's an order in this space.
What about
And
a single woman or a widow?
Let me finish. So in this protected space, like, I believe women can prophesy. Not only can, I believe women should prophesy. I believe women should exercise all their gifts. I'm all in favor of that. There's one protected space where the church says this is where men speak with authority and women don't. This space right here. And I don't, like Dave was alluding to, if you want to move the mark from here to here, or here to there, or here to here, I'm not gonna throw stones about that. All I know is that in this space, when the church is speaking with authority about what she teaches and believes, what she wants to rebuke and admonish, this space, we all sit in order. And that's a protected space. We leave it as it is. Now, if we want to sit around after that space, why should she not prophesy there? Like, is the assumption that she can't prophesy? No, it's just the command. You don't do it here. This is a space where men are supposed to do that.
So to clarify, and I think this is me doing PR for you again. Like if after the service closes, one of the sisters in your church stands up and whatever you think prophesying is, like a really charismatic version would be like, okay, church, God is telling me that like
Right.
so and so and so. And you
Right.
would stand at attention. You'd be like, wow, the Spirit is speaking directly to the sister. I'm going to listen.
Outside of this meeting.
Correct. Well, right afterward, 2 minutes afterward.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't have a problem with women prophesying. I've had women prophesy over me. I love it. It's great.
Fantastic.
My wife wears a head covering specifically so she can't prophesy.
And pray, and doesn't need to when she's not praying and prophesying. So what about testimony? What about testimony? What about a testimony after the sermon in the formal gathering? Do you have a problem with that?
We just have women be silent in that time. We have
Did
other
you get that
spaces
from
for
Paul?
that.
Be silent. Did he say be silent? Yeah, I know he did. Okay, that makes sense. That's fair. I doubt that made anyone less mad, but it was clarifying for me.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think it may have made you less mad at least.
I still feel like I had a little gotcha moment there, the way I teed that whole 1 Corinthians 11 thing up.
I know you wanted it, but I think you were grasping.
Yeah.
No, honestly, an interesting conversation for another time would be the way that the gathering is described in 1 Corinthians feels like a very wishy-washy, charismatic house church gathering. Like it feels very spontaneous. It does not feel like 3 songs from the hymnal and a sermon.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if we're not experiencing that sort of charismatic manifestation, the NAR stuff that I'm a big fan of, that's a problem. It's like a tired sigh. Everyone's spent. We're not going to get into this.
No, we're not. We're gonna talk about the patriarchy tonight.
Maybe we could do questions. People were.
Well, we're at 2 hours and 10 minutes now, at least that we've been on Zoom. So
maybe we should leave.
yeah.
Are you tired of this? You don't want to take passive aggressive questions.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind. It's kind of my jam, but I really, you know,
men, though.
as much as my reputation precedes me on this issue, it's actually it's not super high on my priority list.
Yeah,
I feel
let's
like
move on
my
from
churches
this.
are in order, and that's what I care about. And if other people don't, if people feel differently in their marriages and their churches, it's not really my problem.
Yeah, I'd be ready to move on from this conversation. I mean, I've had a conversation on this podcast for about 2 hours with 4 white males about women wearing pants, and now I've had another one with 4 white males about women speaking in church. So I've lost all my woke points. So I'd be happy
sounds biblical to me.
I'd be not the white part. And I feel like women were involved in those conversations, at least in the podcast. But
Well,
yeah, no. I think we've beaten this dead horse.
I do appreciate the opportunity to talk about these things, though. It's good to have some airing of opinions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's been interesting. Like, it's been helpful for me. I guess I've said this before, but I'm going to say it again. Part of the reason why I am so part of the reason, like Matthew in his teaching on headship has been really, really beneficial in my life. From the sense of, I guess my experience would have been I'd grown up pretty hard line, women submission. And that's a pretty strong teaching in the plain setting that I would have grown up in. And then I would have kind of gone more toward a, I don't know if you'd say egalitarian or not, but sort of a little bit almost that my wife and I were living parallel lives. I'm doing my thing, she's doing her thing. And in conversations over the last year and a half, I've realized that importance of that two people becoming one, in my role in that as the head, as loving her as my own body, and like that became alive to me in a way that it hadn't before, and it changed our relationship. And I think that's my biggest frustration with a lot of this conversation that I hear is I don't feel like egalitarian does what it says on the tin. I don't feel like it does. I feel like it strips the magic out of what the marriage relationship is supposed to be and turns it into a partnership. And it's not a partnership. It's something more than just two people being partners. It's you become part of each other in a mystical, magical way that requires the two of you to interact in the way that's described in Ephesians. And I'll be the first one to say, and don't pull my wife because she'll agree, but I do a really lousy job living that out. But I notice that as I live that out and as I look to that model as how I'm supposed to interact with her, it changes everything about the way that we relate. It changes everything for the better. And it's hard. It's really hard. And that's why I feel like the reaction that we've seen against patriarchy or headship or whatever has had the effect of taking the yoke off men's shoulders to step up and be what God's called them to be. And it's making the issue worse when really what needs to be happening is we need to be looking at these vile, coercive men and saying, you're not doing what God's called you to do. Like right. You claim to believe this, that you're the head of the home and the priest of the home and on it goes. And here you are not loving your wife as your own body. And that's the first requirement for you to be the head of your wife. And if you want to be a tyrant and you want to use her for your own gratification, you don't get to pretend like you're being Christ to head of your body. That's malarkey. And I feel like egalitarianism that takes away that model guts the church's ability to look at the guy and say, dude, for real, what is wrong with you? And I know people like that. I could tell you horror stories. I won't for a variety of reasons, but everybody's heard them. Just absolute horror stories of these kind of things that men, well, quote 1 Corinthians 7, so they get to have sex with their wife whenever, and all this kind of thing, which is not what the Bible is teaching. You don't own her. You're members of each other. If she's hurting, you're hurting. And if you don't get that, your body is sick. Your marriage is sick. And it feels like we live in a world that doesn't have the ability to teach that because we don't have the framework to be able to teach it from. Right. And that's why I feel like this conversation is so incredibly important. That's why I feel like this conversation in this teaching is absolutely life-changing in a way that none of what I feel like are the substitutes it can possibly touch. And it's a known fact that within egalitarianism, there's all kinds of people that slip through with all kinds of toxic behavior, but because they say nice things about equality and women and stuff, they get away with it. Like it's a tactic, it's a tool. And so, but we can't talk about that because it sounds good. But to me, the call of Christ to men is to step up and love your wife as your own body. She is part of you. Is so crucial to this whole understanding. And so it was life. It's been life-changing for me. It continues to be life-changing for me as I learn to walk in and live it out. And that's what I want for everybody. I want everybody to be able to experience that. And so like this is more than just an academic discussion to me. This is personal. What does it mean for me in my home as I get up every day and put my shoes on and go to work and walk beside my wife? How do I love her? How do I avoid sticking my arm in the wood chipper? And so that's where my passion comes out of. And nobody who ever told me that it was a 50-50 partnership was ever able to help me to love my wife and walk with her as Christ taught me to. And so that's my message. That's why I care about this. Not because I want to subjugate my wife, but because I want to be the Christ in my home that God's called me to be.
Yeah, amen, brother. I think for me, the closing thought is, in this conversation, I'm so tired of people telling me what things don't mean. Every time I engage in this conversation, it's like, well, that's dumb, and it doesn't mean this, and it doesn't mean that, and it's easy to just say, okay, well, tell me what it does mean. It's dumb if women can speak after the church breaks up their meeting, but not before. Okay, well, tell me what it does mean. Tell me when she is supposed to be silent. Tell me why she is supposed to ask her husband at home. Tell me why she is supposed to have power of authority on her head. Tell me why the order is the way it is. Tell me why it says so many things to women. And that it's like, I feel like it's like talking to conspiracy theorists sometimes when I'm with the free folk. It's like, you don't have to present or articulate any kind of defensible thing. You just have to shoot holes at something else, and that's your whole argument. If you want to make a dent in the patriarchy, give biblically sound teaching about what these things do mean instead of what you think they don't mean, and that's what will be compelling. So that's a tip to anybody that wants to dismantle the patriarchy.
I have one more thing. Somebody in the comments said, I feel like I probably already know the answer, but if you want to go on record, Matthew, this is a comment. I'll just read the comment and then you can respond. One of my frustrations with the term patriarchy is because it literally means father rule. I'm not totally opposed to Matthew's view on husbands and wives, though I'm not in agreement. But the term patriarchy conjures up fathers being the head of their daughters until their daughter is married. Does Matthew embrace this aspect of patriarchy?
I don't know how to answer that exactly. I mean, my daughters, I have a 21-year-old daughter and a 20-year-old daughter and a 17-year-old daughter. The two of my older daughters are married. The two of my older daughters are baptized and the oldest one's married. My daughter, who's 20, lives in Kampala for the last 2 years. And I still feel like I have a strong influence on her life. You know, we had conversations about head covering and modesty just not too long ago. And she very much looks to me for opinions and direction and guidance. And I want to be that to her. But when it comes time to her making her own decisions, she's a grown woman who's baptized in the church. Like, I treat her like that. She has her own power to make her own decisions. I think that we're a close family and we rely on each other and care very much what each other thinks. That's the way I want it. I don't feel like I have any need or place to compel her to do anything because I think so. That's why I believe in adult conversion. So, bleeding into a whole nother topic, the reason I advocate so strongly for adult conversion is that one aspect of the gospel call is the capacity to leave father and mother and follow Christ. And when a child becomes baptized, I feel like they're subject to Christ in the church, and that's a leaving of the household in certain ways. But I do feel still responsible for her. I think the older she gets, the less I need to be involved with her life and her decision-making process. But I feel like, I don't know. It's a weird question to ask. I certainly feel like I have let me say it this way. I don't feel like being a father is the same as being a husband. There's a big difference between those two things. But I also feel like, and we didn't talk about this, Dave, but I feel like these components of how this order works is more generalized into gender, because of the Corinthians passage. Marriage is an exclusive relationship, and only marriage is headship. So I don't consider myself the head of my daughters or my sons. I'm only the head of my wife. But there are general prescriptions in the scriptures about men and women, regardless of their marital status.
So
If I
then
could speak to that, I wanted to just mention that. I mean, I feel like I've been fairly personally affected by this whole idea of the man being the head of his daughter until he can hand her off to her husband's authority. I think that is a load of BS. And I've been very hurt by that ideology when I was trying to marry Brenna. And it's a whole story, and I don't want to throw anyone under the bus. So it wasn't Brenna's fault. But I think that that's complete garbage. I don't, if I have daughters, which I'm hoping to not have any more children, but if I have daughters,
It's terrible.
Matthew's triggered
Dude,
now.
dude, have 3 kids in 11 months, and you might agree. Brenna wants daughters, so if we have daughters, I don't believe I have one more iota of authority over my daughter than I do over my son, especially when they become adults. I think that can lead to some pretty destructive things. Now you guys probably disagree with that a little bit. I don't know, but you're wrong if you do. I did want to mention, like Matthew, you said that a lot of your detractors don't seem to be logical. They don't answer straight questions. I think the reason, and I don't want to sound patronizing here, I think the reason why a lot of that is the case is because there's so much abuse of male authority. And we've talked about this ad nauseum tonight, so I'm not trying to go down this track again. But I think that a little bit of grace in these situations is necessary because of all the abuse that has happened. And if I have like as my final closing statement, I would much rather err on the side of a historically marginalized group. And even if I erred on the side of being unbiblical in promoting their well-being, I would rather err on that side than err on the side of the oppressor. And I think that's, as a Christian, that should be our posture in any of these conversations. At the same time, like, I understand what you're saying. You're standing to your convictions about what you believe Scripture teaches, and I'm sure I wasn't as I didn't stand up enough for women's rights on this episode and challenge you guys as much as most of the audience wanted. In fact, probably most of them are pretty angry with the fact that there's no women on the call, which actually I wasn't my idea, but I still joined the call with all men, so I guess I'm still culpable. But yeah, I don't know where I was going with that. That's
Well,
my
go make your
closing
wife a
statement.
sandwich and you can get some points back.
Okay, will do.
But
I'll let you have the final word there. I don't need to say anything more.
Well, I just want to be clear, just in case anybody wasn't paying attention. So you would definitely repudiate the stereotypical 27, 26, and 25-year-old daughters still living at home under the control of their father because they haven't been married off. Like, that's something you would clearly repudiate.
I mean, I don't think she has any obligation to. I would be glad to
right.
live with my 27-year-old single daughter, and I think she'd be glad to live with me. We'd be the best of friends. But she certainly doesn't. I mean, so my daughter's coming back from Kampala this fall, and she plans to get an apartment with some single sisters. She wants to live close in my neighborhood, but yeah, I don't need to control her.
Yeah, well, I knew
She's a
that was
grown
the
woman.
case, but I just wanted you to go on record because I'm helping Titus do the PR here.
All right. Well, I need to cut you guys a check for my PR team. I guess we'll see if you did any good.
Yeah, for all the people who think Matthew's terrible, you're wrong. He's a great guy. Dave's not a Nazi either. If you think that, then sorry, you're wrong there.
Titus is not. I will go to record saying Titus is not as far out as I thought he was before we went on here. So
He's not as woke as he pretends to be.
yeah,
Tattoo and all.
I think we probably agree on 95% of what's involved in this issue we discussed. And
Let's go
I'm
93.
93. Yeah, we got tired. Yeah, that's probably true.
Sounds
All
good.
right, guys. Well, let's cut it.
Lord bless you guys. It was really good. I really enjoyed it. So we'll talk next time.
All right.
All
Thanks
right,
for
good
your time.
night.
Bye.